Good morning. I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, one-on-one, President Biden, in an exclusive interview with today's Craig Melvin, looks back at his first 100 days in the White House, how he's responding to the crisis at the southern border as he deals with criticism from his own party. Breaking overnight, tragedy strikes Israel. At least 44 people have been killed in a stampede at a packed religious festival in the northern part of the country. We'll bring you the latest and response from Israeli officials. Faking it. Conspiracy forums online are now posting directions on how to forge your vaccine card. We'll tell you how exactly they're doing it and what the CDC is doing to stop it. And anchors away. The CDC is now, quote, committed to resuming cruises here in the U.S. by midsummer. How the agency is working to ensure smooth sailing for an industry suspended during the pandemic. And a happy Friday morning to you all. You're stuck with me today as Joe has the morning off. And we're going to begin with that breaking news overnight out of Israel. 44 people have died and 150 are injured following a stampede at a religious festival. It's one of the deadliest civilian disasters the country's ever seen. NBC's global correspondent Raf Sanchez joins us now. Raf, good morning. This is just heartbreaking. What happened here?
Savannah, that is the question people across Israel are asking themselves this morning. Here's what we do know. Tens of thousands of people went up to a mountain in the north of the country last night to mark the religious festival of Lag BaOmer. Coming down the mountain, they had to pass through a narrow metal walkway that at one point went around a sharp corner and then down a flight of stairs. And it looks like at that corner, there was confusion, there was overcrowding, and then people got trampled underfoot. I spoke a little earlier to an official with Magan David, that's the Israeli National Ambulance Service. He told me there are children as young as 15 among the 44 dead. More than 150 people injured. They are being treated in hospitals across northern Israel. But Savannah, as you said, this is one of the worst disasters Israel has ever seen in peacetime, and there's still a lot of questions about what happened here.
And Raf, you just mentioned some of it, but what other reaction have we heard from officials?
Yeah, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu calling this a terrible disaster. He's called for a national day of mourning on Sunday. And he actually traveled to Mount Hermon this morning to see the site for himself. But when he got there, he was heckled by a small crowd. And that's a reflection of the fact that this morning in Israel, there is deep shock, there is deep grief, but there's also deep anger over how this was able to happen. There's anger with the organizers of this event, but there's also anger with the government that authorities didn't have a firmer grip on this huge gathering. This was the largest public event in Israel since the start of the COVID pandemic. And the Israeli Health Ministry actually warned earlier in the week, this should not go ahead as planned because of the risk of spreading COVID. It turned out to be a different kind of tragedy, but the warnings were there about the size of the crowds we were going to see. Israeli police say they are investigating, and Savannah, they say if they find any evidence of criminal negligence, they will hold people accountable.
All right, and that means that we will keep everyone updated on this. Raf, thank you so much. Now, as President Biden looks back on his first 100 days in office, the Today Show's Craig Melvin sat down with him exclusively to discuss how he views his presidency at this point. NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba joins us now with more on this exclusive sit-down. Monica, good morning. So first, let's talk challenges here. One of the president's biggest challenges has been the crisis on the border. And in fact, we had this new NBC News poll out this week that checked in with voters on the president's first 100 days. And this was where he received his lowest marks. How did he address this in the interview?
Exactly, Savannah. And if we even look to his joint address from Wednesday evening, he didn't really discuss immigration in depth. He only spent a couple of minutes on it, and he didn't at all raise the issue of unaccompanied minors at the southern border. But in this exclusive interview that our own Craig Melvin did with the president yesterday, he pressed him specifically on the issue of reuniting families. Of course, that was something that the Biden administration in the early days after being sworn in prioritized. They created a task force to do it. But Craig asked him about some of the results of that so far. Take a listen to this first exchange.
During the campaign, you pledged to reunite hundreds of children who have been separated from their parents by the previous administration. A According to our reporting, in your first 100 days, not one child's been reunited.
I don't think that.
How is that?
I don't think that's true, but that could be. What we have done is we have united children with their families as they've come across the border. But one of the things is we don't know yet where those kids are. We're trying like hell to figure out what happened. It's almost like being a sleuth, and we're still continuing to try like hell to find out where they are.
You mentioned that poll, Savannah. That's absolutely critical context here. In terms of who is in charge of working on some of the root causes of migration, we know that the president tasked Vice President Harris with dealing with diplomatic relations with the Northern Triangle, and she's expected to travel to the region in about a month or so.
Now, Monica, President Biden also responded to Republican Senator Tim Scott's response to the speech. He's who delivered that rebuttal. What did he say about it?
Notably, he was asked actually whether he had the time to watch it, and he said that he didn't. But Craig specifically asked the president about what Senator Scott said in his remarks, which was this claim that America is not a racist country. And then the president had a couple of answers in this interview talking about his own view on that specifically. Let's take a listen now to that portion of the interview.
I watched the speech last night. I watched the address, and then I watched the rebuttal from the junior senator of South Carolina last night, Tim Scott. He said, among other things, America isn't racist. Is it?
No, I don't think the American people are racist. But I think after 400 years, African Americans have been left in a position where they are so far behind the eight ball in terms of education, health, in terms of opportunity. I don't think America is racist, but I think the overhang from all of the Jim Crow and before that slavery have had a cost, and we have to deal with it.
In terms of policy, when we talk about race relations, this president has said he wants to see more done on voting rights. And then on another track, when it comes to police reform, we know that he has urged lawmakers to try to get the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act passed by the one-year anniversary of Mr. Floyd's death on May 25th, Savannah.
Monica, let's talk about something else that Craig touched on in this interview. The apartment of former President Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, was raided by federal investigators on Wednesday. Giuliani went on Fox News last night to defend himself, saying he never represented a Ukrainian national. Now, when Craig asked the president about this, it's really a question of his involvement with the Justice Department. What do you have to say?
From the very beginning, this president has said he wants the Department of Justice to be completely independent. And it seems that that kind of philosophy is applying in this case as well. Craig asked the president whether he was even aware or given a heads up. The president said no and explained again that independence for him when it comes to his own attorney general and these investigations is crucial. Take a listen.
Federal investigators searched the home and the office of Rudy Giuliani as part of an investigation into his time as President Trump's attorney, his dealings with Ukraine. Were you aware of that raid before it happened?
I give him my word I was not. I made a pledge. I would not interfere in any way, order, or try to stop any investigation the Justice Department had underway. I learned about that last night when the rest of the world learned about it. My word. I had no idea this was underway.
Have you been briefed on any other investigations involving?
And I'm not asking to be briefed. I'm not asking to be briefed. That's the Justice Department's independent judgment. This last administration politicized the Justice Department so badly. So many of them quit. So many left because that's not the role. It's not the role of a president to say who should be prosecuted, when they should be prosecuted, who should be not prosecuted. That's not the role of the president. The Justice Department is the people's lawyer, not the president's lawyer.
And that's just a small portion of Craig's interview. Of course, we'll have more of that throughout the morning, Savannah, including some news, I'm told, on a new presidential pet. So stay tuned for that.
Monica, thank you so much. And as she mentions, there will be much more of that interview, including what's next for the president's economic recovery plan in the next hour on News Now. Monica, thank you as always. This morning, new signs the U.S. is turning a corner in the pandemic, and the shots are working. The number of new COVID cases is dropping as more people get vaccinated. But Dr. Anthony Fauci says too many Americans are still testing positive every day. Here's what he told Lester Holt.
We've reached we flattened the curve, Lester, but we flattened it at a level that's unacceptably high. We have a 7-day average of new infections of about 60,000 per day. We've got to get it remarkably below that.
Coming up, a ban on menthol cigarettes and flavored cigars is in the works at the FDA. We'll tell you why the agency says the move could help Black communities and the pushback they're receiving up next. As you know, if you've received the shot or if you've just seen this on your social media feeds, once you're vaccinated, you get a little card that essentially proves it. Well, forgery of those COVID vaccine cards is on the rise. Conspiracy and anti-government forums, as well as pro-Trump websites, are posting instructions on how to do it. Some are even including open source CDC templates that state health departments have posted online. And experts warn this could impact how effective real vaccine cards are. NBC News senior reporter Ben Collins joins us now with the latest on what's very scary on the internet. Ben, thanks for being with us today. Now, tell us more about your latest reporting and how these forums are promoting ways to forge these cards.
Well, the issue is here that these cards have no real thing to verify them quickly. There are vial numbers on there, but even those you can't really, if you were a bouncer at a bar, if you worked in an airline or something, there's no real way to verify those quickly. And people on these forums, these anti-vax forums, have found this out. And, they are giving direct instructions of how to pull this off. They're giving card stock that makes it look like the exact, weight and thickness of each of these cards to make it look like a real card. The DPI, which is like the resolution on the font when you print it out, that's on these instructions as well. They've gamed this out for months. The big problem is these were left on government websites, on the state of Wyoming or the state of Missouri's website. They were left available as high-resolution PDFs. And people on pro-Trump forums were like, hey, I think we can get away with not taking the shot and just forging these things.
So, Ben, what's the CDC going to do to rein in this problem?
There's not really much they can do right now. First of all, the number one thing that you can do is remind people that it's illegal to do this. The FBI is on the lookout for people who are forging these at scale, who are trying to hand them out in public, anti-vaxxers who have made this sort of a cause to get these out there to people who don't want to take the shot. So that's the number one way you can remind people is that this is forgery. It's not legal. But there's no larger platform here. This was in part to make it so people didn't think there was some big scary operation to track and chip people and stuff like that. There isn't. But that is going to, in the long run, make it much harder for people to know if they're running a business, if somebody in their business has been vaccinated.
Yes, Ben, thank you for the reminder that we have not, in fact, been chipped or anything like that. But now, Ben, now that these templates are out there all over the internet, let's talk about the impact they could have on real cards. I mean, you just put it very well. A bouncer at a bar, someone working for an airline, they just look at this card. And I guess right now the process is if it looks real, then they assume that it is because it's not like there's some barcode they're scanning. So what does this mean going forward for people who have had the shot, who have a real card, and now there's this threat?
Yeah, right now it's kind of an honor system. It's not a great situation. There are states, New York State has this thing called the Excelsior Pass, where there's a little bit more verification involved, and that'll go through an app. But right now it's state by state, and sometimes there is nothing at the state level. So you're really just relying on these little cards that anybody can print out, anybody can forge. It's a big gaping loophole, but the honor system is going to have to work for now.
Yeah, a real loophole. Ben Collins, thank you so much. The FDA announced plans to ban menthol cigarettes and all flavored cigars. Anti-smoking advocates say menthol masks the true taste of cigarettes, making it easier to start smoking and harder to quit. The FDA's move could have a major impact on smoking among children and communities of color. NBC News health and medical reporter Erica Edwards has been following this major change from federal health officials. Erica, good morning. First of all, we're talking about something that's not COVID, which is quite interesting. So thanks for being here to join us for this one. Now, groups have been fighting for this menthol ban for decades. So explain what this ban entails and why it is, in fact, happening now.
Yeah. Hi, Savannah. Good morning. So this is just the first step in a very long regulatory rulemaking process within the FDA. It's going to take years, for anywhere from 2 to 3 years, to finalize and implement this ban. Now, advocates of the ban say that's not necessarily such a bad thing because it gives them time to create smoking cessation programs tailored toward people who use menthol cigarettes, as well as those little flavored cigars. And that's a bit of news that was sort of lost in the headlines yesterday. The ban on all flavors of little cigars, which have become hugely popular among high school students in recent years. They come in kid-friendly flavors like grape and cherry and chocolate. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy talked about the potential health benefits of such a ban yesterday.
And
we've got to recognize that this is not only a product that is contributing to tobacco-related deaths, but we also have to remember that despite all the headlines which are focused on COVID-19, that tobacco-related disease remains the leading cause of preventable death in the country. So this action that the FDA is looking to take would help us to reduce that burden of disease.
So, Savannah, one group in particular that stands to benefit the most, communities of color.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So the FDA hopes this ban will improve overall health among communities of color, especially Black Americans. How has menthol impacted that group? Why is that something specific here that they think could come out of this?
Yeah, so the tobacco industry has targeted its advertising for menthol products toward the African-American community for decades, and it worked. Now, 85% of Black smokers use menthol products compared to 30% of white smokers. Now, that's led to huge health disparities. Black men and women are far more likely to be diagnosed with lung cancer at later, more dangerous stages than other groups. Black men in particular have the highest death rates from lung cancer by far in the country. And in fact, now every year, 47,000 Black Americans die of smoking related illnesses every year in this country. This is a hugely preventable problem, Savannah.
And then, Erica, the other big thing here is that it could help stop what they call youth initiation here to smoking. Kids and teens start to smoke, but we know that vaping and e-cigarettes are really one of the key ways young people get hooked here. But that's not included in this ban. Do we know why? Could that ever happen? What do advocates say?
Yeah, so there is still a belief within the FDA that menthol-flavored e-cigarettes or electronic cigarettes could be a good and safer alternative for those menthol smokers who are trying to quit combustible cigarettes. Now, of course, as you mentioned, vaping has just skyrocketed among youth. It's become an epidemic in recent years. Those who advocate for a ban on menthol-flavored e-cigarettes say that while they're ecstatic about yesterday's action, they say a lot more work needs to be done. In fact, half of kids who smoke use menthol products, Savannah.
Yeah, and Erica, actually, something that does seem to be moving in the right direction when it comes to vaping is the fact that there's some stipulations now around those flavored cartridges, which is one of the ways that really gets kids hooked on this, which seems similar to menthol here. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, yes, there was a ban on many flavored e-cigarettes back in 2018. However, since then, the industry has found ways to sort of get around some of those loopholes and create additional products. You can still buy products online in stores of disposable electronic devices, puff bars, things like that. So it's going to take some time. Advocates say they really still need to tackle the e-cigarette problem. But for now, the focus is on menthol and those flavored cigars.
All right, Erica, thank you so much for joining us for something other than COVID, and make sure we get this other important health news in there. We're going to stay on some health news now. If you plan to head to the beach this summer, you may find some unexpected guests joining you. Researchers say the same ticks that cause Lyme disease are now just as common on the beach as they are in the woods. NBC News medical contributor Dr. Natalie Azar is here with what we should watch out for. And Dr. Azar, I'm going to start with my own personal horror story because, of course, some freak accident has happened to me, which was that I had a tick on the beach. I got one, and it actually was quite large by the time I found it. designated. I think it was there for a little while. But mine was what's called an American dog tick, which I've now learned does not carry Lyme. But I got this thing called Rocky Mountain spotted fever, which sounds scarier than it was. I really just needed antibiotics. But talk to us about the importance of catching this, going to a doctor, knowing what type of tick it is so that you can know if Lyme is actually a threat to you.
Well, so yeah, you bring up a lot of good points, Savannah. Number one is that not all ticks are the same. There are multiple different tick-borne illnesses in the U.S. Lyme happens to be the most common, what we call vector-borne illness in the U.S. And it's transmitted by a very particular tick. It's the black-legged tick. And I think if you go to the CDC website, they actually will give you pictures of all the different ticks. Now, that brings me to my first point about if you find a tick on your body, what do you do? Do you freak out? Do you take it somewhere to get tested? There's a lot of questions that I know folks have. The first and most important thing to do is not to panic.
I could use that tip.
I know. We do recommend removing the tick with tweezers and trying to, sort of pinching up and going very straight, vertically to remove. It's actually not recommended to bring it to, commercial testing places and have it tested because there can be a lot of false positives and false negatives there. The diagnosis really relies on, clinical symptoms that are consistent with potential Lyme, as well as if you live in an area that is endemic with Lyme disease. So the first thing to do, of course, is to call your doc and let them know what's going on.
Dr. Azar, I wish that you would have been my friend at this point in my life when I had this tick, because I kid you not, it was on my scalp, and I ran down the street of Manhattan with my hair clipped up to urgent care to be
I'm sure you did, Savannah.
I'm sure that doesn't surprise you at all. Now, Dr. Azar, we've been told to cover up and wear a hat to avoid ticks in the woods, those types of things.
Yeah.
When you're on the beach, you're not very covered up, probably. So how do we avoid them? What do we need to do?
Well, so the good news is that if you're really just in the sand or on the beach, on the sand and in the water, you're probably okay. The tick is not going to be found, crawling around the sand. It really will be in those grassy, bushy areas. So if you are walking on a trail, let's say to the beach or, something like that, stay in the middle of the trail. Tick repellent, use anything that is EPA authorized, think DEET, picaridin. A lot of folks, you may not want to necessarily pre-treat your bathing suit, but you can pre-treat your clothes with something called permethrin. Something that's really important is to shower within 2 hours of being outside somewhere. Studies have shown that if you do shower within 2 hours of being exposed, you can actually wash the tick off of you. And you want to check your body. And it's not just the front, what you can see. You have to look behind your knees. You have to look in between your legs, in your scalp. You can obviously have somebody look for you, and also take off your clothes that you've been wearing and run them for 10 minutes and on a hot cycle that will actually kill the tick.
Take it from me, the scalp is one to check because it's not somewhere you see, or it would be so obvious. All right.
And check your pets.
Check your pets. Great point. Dr. Azar, as always, thank you for all the help that you provide us here and me personally. See you soon. Now back to politics. President Biden is traveling to Philadelphia today to mark the 50th anniversary of Amtrak. It's the train service he used to commute as a senator, and then as vice president, he even earned the nickname Amtrak Joe. Now, Biden narrowly won Pennsylvania in 2020, but the state still poses challenges for Democrats in upcoming elections. It's home to counties that were once reliably blue, but now overwhelmingly vote Republican. NBC News Now correspondent Dasha Burns continues our NBC News County to County series, talking to voters in Beaver County, Pennsylvania. Now, Dasha, I just mentioned a moment ago that he won the state, and actually when he won the state, he won the election. This is what people were sort of waiting on that Saturday, November 7th. So what are voters now saying in this state where that happened about the economy after President Biden's first 100 days?
Hey, Savannah, good morning. Yeah, I was actually in Pennsylvania when that happened. But I have to tell you, I know we're turning back to politics, but that tick segment has me really freaked out because this is very much tick territory, and I cannot believe that happened.
Check your scalp,
so I'm
Dasha.
going to go buy some repellent and wear my long pants.
Yeah, check your scalp. You don't want Lyme or
right after this.
Yeah. I love it.
But yeah, this is a county. This is a region that used to be Blue Dog Democrat territory. This was a steel mill area, a lot of union workers, but that steel industry left. And with it, a lot of people here felt left behind, especially by the Democratic Party. And so over the years, it's trended more and more red and then went deep red in 2016 with Donald Trump and stayed that way largely in 2020. And the voters here, as we've been talking to them for the last year or so, the number one priority that they've consistently talked about has been the economy. It's why they said they elected a businessman for president, and it's why they're concerned about some of the proposals from the Biden administration. Though a lot of the folks we talked to this week told us that they do see the economy turning around. They see their businesses doing better. They feel like we're coming around the corner of this pandemic. But who do they give that credit to? Take a listen.
He is one of the luckiest people in the world to have walked into office with an economy that was guaranteed once the pandemic and we came into a post-COVID world was going to be on the rise as it was artificially shut down due to the pandemic over this past year. And also a vaccine distribution that was well underway. I know that Operation Warp Speed started in the spring of last year before he had even won his Democratic nomination to be president.
And that's what we heard from voter time and time again, that President Trump does deserve some of that credit that President Biden is now getting from a lot of the country on both the vaccine and the economy. Savannah.
Dasha, let's stick to the economy and talk now about President Biden's plans with this proposed infrastructure bill. Now, it's expensive, so it includes a tax hike on the wealthy and large businesses in order to pay for it, something that Republicans in Congress anyway are not happy about. So what did these Republican voters say about that?
Yeah, that was far and away the biggest concern from voters here. This is an area with a lot of both big C and small C conservatives. And the big question from all of them was, how is President Biden going to pay for all of this? I wanted to hear from Ernie and Connie on this. They're a couple here. Ernie has lived here all of his life. Connie has lived here for 35 years. So they have seen this region go through a lot, ups and downs with the economy. Listen to their perspective on this.
Concerns me about the taxation on corporate tax and that. Is that going to be so high and hurt corporations where they're going to either have to lay people off or move back to Europe or Asia, someplace with their company like they did in the past? That concerns me a little bit.
Connie, what about you?
Well, it's kind of like so far so good. The economy's going crazy, which is wonderful for investors. How long that's going to last, who knows? I'm very cautiously optimistic.
Another big concern, Savannah, is the administration's posture on oil and gas. You've got a Shell plant behind me. I'm not sure if you can see here. This Shell plant has been critical to this economy. And so the administration's posture on the fossil fuel industry is something people are pretty concerned about here. Savannah.
All right. Dasha Burns, thank you so much. Coming up, America's next major fight for voting rights is heating up. We'll take you to Austin, Texas, up next. The battle over who has more control in Congress is already gearing up in Texas. It's all because of the new U.S. Census data. The population of Texas grew by 16% in the past 10 years. That means the Lone Star State gets 2 extra congressional seats, the biggest increase in the country. And the fight over who gets to draw the lines for those new districts is already underway. MSNBC senior national correspondent Chris Jansing joins us now from outside the Texas Capitol in Austin. Chris, good morning. Now, party leadership is already trading barbs over this. So what is each side saying?
Yeah, this is going to be an epic legal battle. There is absolutely no doubt about that, Savannah. Let's start with where we are. These new census numbers came out. Texas gained about 4 million new people in terms of population. And we can show you in a graphic that's 2 more congressional seats. That gives it the second most power, growing power. It's the only state that gained 2 congressional seats, bringing them totally to 38. And here's where it gets interesting. The building you see behind me, the state legislature, they're in session right now. Those are the folks that have the power to redraw those district lines, decide where those congressional districts are. It's controlled by Republicans. The governorship is in Republican hands, and the state legislative board is Republican, which means they're the ones who get to decide that. Boy, it is going to be a huge fight. I talked to key people on both sides to get their take. Take a listen.
Well, I think it's going to be a big fight. Texas, unfortunately, shamefully, has a history of passing racially discriminatory maps, gerrymandered maps on a racial basis that have disenfranchised African-American, Hispanic, and Asian-American communities in Texas. And that's not me saying that. That's federal courts that have said that repeatedly over the last decade.
What the Democrats are doing is, once again, it's the racial divisiveness and the identity politics. When they're just losing elections, they're losing population from blue states, and they're coming here to Texas because people want better opportunities.
If history tells us anything, well, 10 years ago, there was another huge legal fight, which is why they see this happening once again. Those 4 million people we mentioned who have moved into Texas, they are predominantly people of color. And so what the Democrats argue is these districts need to represent that mix.
And Chris, now, if you could help put in context for us also just why Texas is so important to the big national picture here and what these 2 extra seats mean.
Yeah, that's the critical piece of this, right? Because Nancy Pelosi, of course, and the Democrats control the U.S. House of Representatives, but Republicans in 2022 would only have to pick up 5 seats. 5 seats, and redistricting is critical to that. Now, if you want to go back and take a look at 2020, it's fascinating. The Democrats won big in terms of the overall popular vote. But take a look at the places, if you look at the states where there's total control by the Republicans, as you can probably hear the backfiring of that motorcycle, only 75 of those congressional districts are going to be controlled by Democrats in those states, again, where they have total control, compared to 187 districts that are controlled by the Republicans. So they have that advantage, and they also have a historic advantage because these first elections often favor the party not in the White House. In that case, of course, it will be the Republicans, Savannah.
Now, Chris, thank you for battling with that for us. That sounded like that was maybe a whole pack of motorcycle riders. It would not stop.
Yeah, actually, I think I can Savannah, if I can, I have a little bit more sound that will tell you about the big national picture. Take a listen. Please. And the money that's going to come in here, by the way.
Yeah, let's listen.
We know that they're going to flood money in here from people like Michael Bloomberg, Mark Zuckerberg, George Soros, whomever you wish. But the thing is that Texas is strong because of the policies of Texas are strong. And the policies of Texas are about advancing individuals and their hopes, dreams, and aspirations.
Republicans like to talk a lot about the Texas miracle, our growing economy and everything. That miracle is driven not by Republican policies in this building behind me. It's driven by the people of this state, our diverse population, our immigrant communities, and so our redistricting maps should give voice to that Texas miracle. The stakes for the U.S. Congress are enormous. You can't be overstated.
Yeah, and it is true that here in Texas, 10 years ago, the maps that were drawn were declared unconstitutional. It pushed back the primary. Talk to Democrats here, and they'll tell you that extra time gave Ted Cruz time to build his name recognition, and he ended up getting elected. There are so many aspects of this and why it's so critically important, Savannah.
It certainly is. Great sound, great interviews, as always. And again, thanks for sticking with all that distraction going on over there. Chris, thanks so much. A joint investigation by NBC News Digital and ProPublica is exposing the tragic consequences of February's Texas power outages. A record number of carbon monoxide poisonings took place in Houston due to desperate families using running cars to stay warm while the garage door was closed. NBC's Antonia Hilton joins us now with more on this investigation and this tragic story. Good morning, Antonia.
Morning, Savannah. So Texas is one of only 6 states that leaves carbon monoxide regulations up to the local government, which often leads to uneven protections and little enforcement. So when the Texas storm hit, vulnerable residents, low-income residents, and immigrants paid the price and often made fatal mistakes. Take a look at this.
Like millions of Texans, Shalamu Bekele and his wife woke on February 15th, freezing in their Houston home as the power grid failed. They're Ethiopian immigrants, and their 7- and 8-year-olds had never seen snow before.
I was just thinking the power will come back now.
But it didn't. So as temperatures dropped, his wife turned on the car in their garage to get warm. Unaware, the home had no carbon monoxide alarm.
What was happening?
By the time I went there, I found her. She passed out.
Then the kids in Shalamu collapsed too. All had been poisoned by carbon monoxide. He woke up almost a day later in the hospital to heartbreak. His wife and daughter had died. His son was in intensive care.
I screamed, and I don't even remember what I was saying.
In our investigation with ProPublica and the Texas Tribune, we found at least 11 Texans died from carbon monoxide poisoning.
Their kids are down in my house not feeling good.
More than 1,400 were also taken to emergency rooms, like the one at Memorial Hermann.
We might see 50 patients a year who were poisoned with carbon monoxide, and we surpassed that on our first night.
According to data obtained by NBC News, almost 80% of the people poisoned by carbon monoxide and treated at Memorial Hermann during the height of the storm were Black or Latino. Texas is one of only 6 states that leave carbon monoxide alarm regulations up to local government. Shalamu said if an alarm had been required in his home, his wife and daughter would still be here.
Is there someone you want to see held accountable for this?
I would. Hold accountable the government, the electricity company, and police altogether. They could have saved a lot of lives.
Shalamu is suing the utility. Meantime, he's moved his son out of the home he bought to give his family security and opportunity in America.
So, the doctor who you met right there has told us that, in response to all of this and the lessons learned they saw through the Texas storm, their hospital network is going to be educating residents in anticipation now that Texas is going to see storms like this and other natural disasters in the future, and that there may continue to be vulnerable residents who aren't aware of the risks with carbon monoxide. Savannah.
Antonia, when you hear the fact that that man says they would still be here if we just had this, if we knew this, I mean, it's just heartbreaking. So are states like Texas now looking to act on any type of regulations here instead of just leaving it up to local government?
It's absolutely heartbreaking. And one of the heartbreaking elements of the dynamic is that in the wake of the storm, we all saw Texas lawmakers, the governor, a rush to reform the power grid and address that aspect of the crisis. But this was really a crisis within a crisis. And we have not seen Texas lawmakers yet move to introduce new legislation to address carbon monoxide. And frankly, one of the reasons our team of reporters worked on this story was hope that we would bring attention to this and perhaps people like the Bekele family would never be put in this position again.
Absolutely. And the best type of reporting comes out of places like that, to want to bring attention to something and show people this story. Antonia, great report. Thank you so much. This morning, Apple is rolling out new emojis, and a decision by a popular online food publication will have you asking, where's the beef? Here's NBC News investigative and consumer correspondent Vicky Nguyen with more on this week's edition of Good to Know.
Good morning, Savannah. We start with an important consumer alert. Thousands of Nesco coffee bean roasters, like this one, are recalled for a potential fire hazard. The Consumer Product Safety Commission says the recall involves 5,300 units with model CR0413 coffee bean roasters with a date code of 2520 or 3220 printed at the bottom of the label. If you have one, immediately stop using the recalled coffee bean roaster and contact Metalware. No injuries have been reported. Apple rolled out its new software update. It includes new features to prevent apps from tracking you and new and fun emojis. Among the additions, a heart on fire, oh yeah, I'm using that, a face with swirly eyes, and to promote inclusivity, gender-neutral couples. Still need your COVID vaccine? Well, it just got a little easier to book your appointment. Uber announced a new partnership with Walgreens, allowing users to schedule their appointments at a nearby pharmacy through the Uber app. Just look for the vaccine icon to schedule that appointment. Let's talk lunch money. The Biden administration launched a summer food program to feed low-income children. The plan will provide up to 34 million kids with about $375 each to buy food for the roughly 10 weeks they're out of school. That's about $7 a day. Where's the beef? We've heard of cutting back on meat, but Epicurious, the popular online food publication, announced it's cutting out beef completely. The ingredient will no longer appear in new recipes, articles, newsletters, or even social media posts. The company has come under fire for canceling beef and being hypocritical about other meats, but Epicurious says it just wants to encourage more sustainable cooking and to help the planet fight climate change. For News Now, I'm Vicki Nguyen, and that's good to know.
All right, coming up, the highly anticipated return of the cruise industry. New guidance from the CDC on when you could set sail next after this. It is time now for our CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day and why they matter to you. CNBC senior markets correspondent Dominic Chu is with us today. Good morning, Dom. What do you have for us?
Good morning, Savannah. Happy Friday to you. Well, first of all, Apple is being charged today by European antitrust regulators over practices in its App Store. They accuse Apple of abusing its dominance in music streaming. The EU investigation stems from a complaint filed by Spotify just 2 years ago. It said that Apple unfairly restricts rivals to its own streaming service on iPhones. Now, Apple calls the case the opposite of fair competition, so keep an eye on those big regulations. Also, Amazon announcing this year's Prime Day sale will be in June. The event was postponed last year from July to October due to the virus pandemic. Amazon says it believes holding Prime Day in June will draw more attention from customers and for vendors. The company says it was concerned that summer travel plans and the Olympics could be factors that would have impacted a later date for Prime Day shopping. And watch shares of Twitter today. The company reporting better than expected earnings as sales of ads remain strong. But that stock is under pressure as Twitter says user growth is slowing. CEO Jack Dorsey says Twitter hasn't done enough to get people to what they're interested in finding fast enough. So some key monetization issues, Savannah, driving that particular trade today. I'll send things back over to you.
All right, Dom, thank you so much.
Sure.
After being shut down for over a year by COVID, cruise ships could set sail again from U.S. ports by mid-July. NBC News correspondent Carrie Sanders is in Miami, where many of those ships come and go from. And Carrie, this is one of those things I wasn't sure we'd see. People wanting to get back on ships, but tell us how they're going to do it safely.
Well, indeed. In fact, you talk about busy port. Look, they've got the Royal Caribbean ship right there, positioning right now to move a little bit further down here at the docks. We have this ship right here. When they christen a ship, they actually take a bottle of champagne and crack it on the bow. And this morning, the cruise ship industry has a lot of bottles of champagne on ice as they are preparing to celebrate the return to business from U.S. ports, which could begin as early as 10 weeks from now.
After more than a year of turbulent waters, the cruise ship industry is ready for some smooth sailing ahead.
This is the first glimmer of light that we've seen to allow us to move forward and work out the final steps to be able to set sail.
Since last March, the CDC banning voyages from U.S. ports because of COVID. Now, in a letter to industry executives, the CDC is setting new standards that may allow ships to sail again as early as mid-July.
It's been 14 months that this industry has been shut down. 14 million passengers, American passengers per year, have not had a chance to sail. The economic impact is massive.
Most of the major cruise lines have been sailing, but from Europe, Asia, and the Caribbean. It was not like that before the pandemic.
Nearly 60% of all cruising originates from U.S. ports. And nearly half of the people who are cruising are Americans.
For months, the cruise line industry has been working on its own safety protocols, many of which align with the CDC's blueprint. The CDC now advising cruise lines they can skip simulated test cruises if 98% of crew and 95% of passengers are vaccinated.
We're really very pleased and very excited because it really does set forth a pathway that we think is achievable, practical, and safe. So, yeah, we're feeling pretty good.
I myself couldn't be happier.
Michelle Allen is an avid cruiser who in 30 years as a travel agent has booked tens of thousands of vacations at sea.
People love to cruise, and I think, hopefully a year from now, we will, be looking back and we'll be full steam ahead.
And Carrie, before they get to full steam ahead, how big of an economic impact has this year-long shutdown had on them?
Well, remember here that the cruise ships themselves are flagged in foreign countries. So when all that federal money was being given to businesses across the country to help them to survive the beginning of this pandemic, the cruise ship industry was cut out. So Royal Caribbean alone, just in the first quarter, reported a $1.1 billion loss. And then you have ports like here in Miami, the busiest port in the country. And we're talking about a $10 to $12 million loss every month, according to the officials here. So the industry, the port, very much ready to celebrate a return to business, as I would say, Savannah, are a lot of vacationers just looking forward to getting back out there.
Is that going to be you, Carrie? Taking a cruise?
We'll see. I mean, I think I'm going to go on one of the earliest cruises just for a news story.
Yeah, I think you should.
See how it's going to work.
I think you should. I can already see the live shot from the deck with a drink, I hope. Carrie, thank you as always.
Absolutely.
The pandemic put the entire performing arts world on pause, but when it came to studying things like dance, drama, and music, determined students and creative teachers figured out ways to keep practicing and progressing. NBC News correspondent Isa Gutierrez has more.
1, 2, ready, go.
There's a famous saying in the art world: the show must go on. Even when the pandemic halted everyday life, performing arts teachers were never going to let it stop them from getting creative online.
Get up in third position. Bring your elbow under in a flatter violin. Good job.
At just 5 years old, Freya Chen is an exceptional young violinist.
I wake up in the morning and then I practice my skills, and then after breakfast I practice my basics, and after lunch I practice my etudes, and after dinner I practice my repertoires.
Since the pandemic began, all of Freya's violin lessons have taken place online. And now, instead of taking 2 30-minute lessons a week, Freya takes 4 15-minute lessons a week via Zoom with her teacher, Brittany Sklar.
Does that make sense? So let's do something.
She can play me all my favorite songs, and every day she can teach me something new.
And while Freya sees some advantages to learning on Zoom,
I won't spend that much time in the car.
She also misses the in-person connection she developed with her teacher.
I cannot hug Brenny or play with Brenny on Zoom.
In March of 2020, world-renowned dance school Alvin Ailey pivoted to online classes and has remained virtual ever since.
We have 30 classes on our group offering through Zoom. We wanted, again, to show up for our community and be there. And I think with grit and grace, we survived.
Alvin Ailey has reached more than 27,000 new students in 70 different countries through virtual programming.
Our students have become a part of our family, so definitely we will continue to have our virtual classes.
And while virtual classes allow for more expansive attendance, there's nothing like the energy of in-person learning. Our
classes offer live musicians, so drummers in the room, the pianist that's playing for the ballet class, just having that live music in the class.
But for now, these virtual classes have an immeasurable impact.
The Zoom dance classes saved people lives, people that were lonely, people who just wanted to find a community, people who wanted to be inspired, people who wanted to belong. So, beyond receiving a service, a fitness, a dance service, I think people just wanted to be around other people.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.